What they have come to understand about millennials and about Gen Y is they are taking that learning, that discovery, and they're saying when it comes to Gen Z, well, they're just the same. They're just millennials going through a phase. They're younger millennials going through a phase. They're just teenagers going through a phase. And while there's some truth to that, they are fundamentally, truly wired differently.
Welcome to the Meaningful Work Podcast, your source for ideas, inspiration, and tools for unleashing your best, most fulfilling work yet. Now, your host, Josh Schneider.
Yes! Welcome to the show. Now, today's guest, Steve Robertson, is CEO of Bold Education. I'm excited because Steve, over the last 10 plus years, has worked with every age group, working into who we now have in our workforce, meaning the late Gen Ys and the Gen Zs. He's seen them develop. He's seen them come through some of the programs and some of the things that we'll talk about. So I'm excited because not only does he have this perspective that so few people in the globe have about the current workforce, how they operate, how they think, but he's also a man of great depth. And he bought me a lobster roll when we met in Boston. And, well, sir, as we both agreed, those underwhelming lobster rolls are delicious, but underwhelming nonetheless. Anyways, Steve, welcome to the show.
Josh, thrilled to be part of this conversation with you, and still a fan of lobster rolls.
Well, I mean, it was maybe just pizza's better. Who knows? Well, let's jump right in. Tell us and walk us through in some ways, what does a typical day look like for you as CEO of Bold Education?
Wow, that sounds like such a simple question, Josh. What is a typical day in anyone's lives these days, right? So a typical day is waking up. That's pretty typical. A typical day is spending a couple of hours before I get into my day, just spending some time alone and processing things in a spiritual way, I guess. But as far as work on a typical day, it just varies so much. We're pioneering in so many ways. We're dealing with multiple generations in so many ways. And so any day is different, from pioneering new programming, figuring out what the latest conversation that young millennials and Gen Z and even Alpha generation are being a part of. Definitely connecting with the team that we have working as part of Bold Education. And I guess something that excites me is we don't really have very many typical days in the business I'm in.
I love it. So just for a little bit of context, because I think the camps and the programs that you've been running are it's such a fascinating idea that I think so many of us are unaware of. Can you just walk through very briefly, I know this is just a part of one of the things that you do, but can you walk us through what that experience was and this big part of what you've been doing over the last many years and what that is exactly?
Yeah, I'd love to do that, Josh. So for the last 22 years, which is, if we rewind, is when my family and I arrived in the United States, I've been involved in a business that one of the components is offering these summer experiences. People might think summer camp, but that really gives you some perspective in your mind, which isn't really an accurate reflection of what we do. But these summer programs that are, there's some primarily academic, but also there's some sporting components to it. But what's fascinating about it is we have the opportunity to bring students from more than 100 countries around the world and all the states in America to different university campuses that we partner with. And we offer a whole range of different programs, different lengths for these students to come and be a part of. And that journey for us has brought some of the most exceptionally talented, amazing, focused young minds from around the world to different universities in America, like I said. And we've had the opportunity to run with them. But what I love about it is the part that I feel like we play is given a part in their journey to call them to a higher, better version of themselves. So we've got these kids from around the world coming to spend summers here, or a portion of their summer here, to try out anything from medicine to business to robotics to engineering. It doesn't matter what we're doing. And that's just the vehicle. But we're part of a journey where we're getting them to connect with people from around the world. We're figuring out how to communicate well. We're figuring out how to be the best version of themselves on a university campus for primarily high school kids. And it's just been, well, the company has been in that space for many, many, many years. But for the last 20 years, I've seen, as you call them, Gen Y, the millennials go through this journey. And we're now seeing Gen Z go through this journey, even Alpha go through this journey. So we've seen them as students in our programs. So we know how to communicate, market, reach them, and how to program for them. So it's got to be compelling and exciting. We've also been in a position to have to do that same set of things for their parents. And we've also had to train, coach this generation as they go through, as they become a little older, to be a part of the summer counselor role. So we've had to train them as employees as well. So the journey's been spectacular, amazing, and it's constantly changing.
So obviously you've seen a tremendous amount of development and changes in these individuals over the years, over a 20-year span. I'm interested, when you're bringing these kids together from all these different places, you've got to keep them excited. You've got to keep them engaged. And, they're thinking about, in essence, their career, but through the vehicle of how do I get into the right school? What do you think, what's driving them? What's lighting up their eyes? Like what's the dream that is facilitating them? And I'm asking kind of selfishly because I'm intrigued from, the workplace perspective. What have you seen shift, or what are you seeing unfolding as these individuals are stepping in and starting to entrench themselves in the workforce?
Wow. So Josh, are you ever going to ask just a simple yes or no question? Because that's a big question again.
It's a run-on question.
Come on. So what's been fascinating, I have fallen in love with the youth in a different way than originally I was fascinated by them. So let me say this. I paid attention to the youth because that was our business. I've always been really passionate about the youth. My background is I was also a tennis coach, and so I coached tennis and was engaging with youth for a number of years, and I was really passionate about that. But something shifted, and to answer your question, what is their drive? What are they interested in? What am I seeing? Well, when Gen Z started to arrive at our programming, I saw that there was fundamentally something different. So the younger millennials, the younger Ys, were really, and these are generalizations, of course, but they were really focused on coming and having a good time, having an experience that was valuable. It exposed them to pre-college life, gave them a perspective of being on a campus, living on a campus, connecting with other people, doing some pursuits, whether it was fashion design or whether it was robotics. And it was amazing. The trips to New York and to Washington, wherever we went on the weekends was amazing. Well, when Gen Z arrived, there was this subtle shift. And then the more I spent time unpacking and studying that data, the more I realized it wasn't so subtle. And Gen Z was here because they were very deliberately pursuing personal growth. And there's that shift between I'm really trying to future-proof myself, as opposed to this is my summer and I'm going to just have a really amazingly cool, good, awesome, excellent time. And again, it's a generalization, but that was part of the shift. And so where we are today, I'm seeing now Gen Z have entered the workforce, and we're starting to see there's a real difference in approach. And when I look at Gen Z and I think about how they are trying to future-proof, you can look at something that I always refer to as the perfect storm. And what the perfect storm looks like in Gen Z's life, there's really four main components that I always talk about. There's more than four, but the four main ones. The number one of those four components is technology. And I can look and see how in every area, whether it's national, international, any kind of demographic, the one thing that Gen Z has had in terms of a perfect storm in their lives that has in part wired them and created them to be who they are is technology. And this change in technology, this rapid advancement of technology, and Gen Z always using it as a tool, not as a toy, has definitely been one component that they have used this technology to engage with the environment, communicate, and it's driven them to pursue things in a different way than previous generations. So, I mean, a really broad question, but you know this. I have a book that's coming out at the end of summer called Aliens Among Us, Gen Z, the Disconnected Generation. And I jokingly call them aliens because they are truly, on every level, different, fundamentally different from any generation we've seen before. So there's been such a shift in everything, how we communicate, how we engage, what they value. And just to close that thought off, I see them as the most siloed individual generation we've ever seen. Everything for them is customized and on demand, when no other generation we've ever worked with has been like that.
So if I ask an even bigger question, what does them being siloed, how does that impact kind of the future of work, if you will, as they step in? Like what changes does an organization need to be thinking about to start preparing for? And it's polarizing to think about the aliens among us, but I love that from the perspective of it really creates a schism, a shift in your mind to imagine an alien walking in on day one. And if you're not realizing that the person here in front of you is driven by something so totally different than anything, and you thought Generation Y was a shift, what I'm hearing you saying is that this is going to be an even more radical shift.
Yeah. So I mean, the reality of from a work perspective is that what we tend to do, and Gen Y, what was amazing about Gen Y, it was one of the first generations that we truly studied, because all of a sudden there was data available. So we started to just unpack this data and look at them, and a lot of people in the corporate setting are tired. They're like, enough already, enough of this stuff. But what is really interesting is that what they have come to understand about millennials and about Gen Y is they are taking that learning, that discovery, and they're saying, when it comes to Gen Z, well, they're just the same. They're just millennials going through a phase. They're younger millennials going through a phase. They're just teenagers going through a phase. And while there's some truth to that, they are fundamentally, truly wired differently. And so the silo component, there's a gentleman by the name of Bruce Tulgan. I hope I said his last name correctly. I've been following him for a while. I don't know exactly how to say his name. I believe that's accurate. He speaks about this thing called an epidemic of undermanagement in the workforce, and I know that it's in the home as well. And what you see is that if leaders in the workplace are, let me say that a different way. He's saying, and I believe this to be accurate, that leaders in the workplace have not been managing. They've been kind of checking in when something is wrong, but leaving people to kind of self-direct. And what Gen Z in the silo comment, in the silo space, is going to require is going to be customized, individualized leading. And so what this gets into is it gets into the space of leaders are going to have to start leading as opposed to just letting things happen and then reacting. And so fundamentally, it is a massive shift. It is deliberate change of how you go about your day-to-day as a leader, because now what's required, and people are only slowly going to see this, because to begin with, they're going to be like, just let it be, and then they're going to be unhappy with the results. We're going to need to come alongside. So I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent, forgive me. Okay, so what we're coming out of is this epidemic of undermanagement. Another way of saying that is this sage on stage mentality, where the leader, the boss, the professor, the teacher would say, do this, and then people would go and do that. That's from the industrial age, industrial revolution, and that's still in effect. But in order to manage this generation really well, what you've got to understand is that it's no longer this sage on stage, because information is no longer the key, right? Every generation, if they want to have access to all information. So Gen Z is already exhibiting the position of, I don't need you to tell me information. I don't need you. So they don't value the legacy that we can bring to a conversation. So within the workspace, what you need is what I call it's a relationship GPS, and GPS stands for guide positioned by the side. So now what I'm saying is leaders have to figure out and come alongside how to come alongside a Gen Z employee, figure out how to get the best out of them. And that is where you're going to start to see the value that this generation is going to and can bring not only to the workplace, but to our lives. If you don't get this, you are not only going to miss out on probably one of the most productive, innovative, creative employee generations that you can ever imagine, but you're also going to miss out on reaching them as your audience or as your target for your business, as your customer. It's a really big deal, and I think most people don't get it yet, that there's been a major shift and that there's a generation that are truly fundamentally wired differently.
So this wiring is not, I think it's easy to look at it perhaps and oh, they're just on their phone, or oh yeah, they grew up with this technology, and as we know, like part of the environment that we grew up in shapes how we view the world. And my core belief is, if someone doesn't feel that you care about them as an employee or as a human being, then you're not creating an environment to access the very best parts of them. As we've seen, right? It doesn't matter how smart somebody is. Now that we know there's more neurons, more signals sent from the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart, there has to be an importance of how somebody feels. And I imagine that's kind of a tricky situation. In terms of how does somebody navigate how somebody coming in who's kind of fundamentally wired different, and it's like, okay, I do believe that how they feel impacts how they show up. Is there an approach or a strategy that they could take to, as a leader, as a manager, as an executive, to kind of cultivate this new person who's now joined forces with you? To get them to realize, hey, there's a way we do something, but I also need to realize there's a way that you do your very best, and brokering that difference.
Wow, I love that question, and we couldn't agree more with one another that when people feel valued and feel good about where they are, that's when you certainly are going to see the best version of them. And so, even though you said it more eloquently than me, yes, 100% agree. So, Josh, I think the way I've seen this developing successfully is, the first thing is to have a new lens and to realize, okay, I have this alien who's coming into my workplace. Immediately making the assumption that that's not just business as usual already puts you in a position to say, well, how can I engage in a more productive way? So that's, in my mind, the first core step that needs to be taken, is just realizing that they're different. The second part of this conversation is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the deliberate approach. Now, bearing in mind that more than 40% less in-person FaceTime with friends is what Gen Z is coming out of. So in other words, Gen Y spent 40% more. That's saying it poorly. It's reversing the statistic. So Gen Z is spending 40% less FaceTime with friends, in-person FaceTime with friends, than Gen Y did. So you bring this person in to the workforce, and you've got to figure out, one, how to to do this in-person FaceTime communication well, because they are the generation that right now is the least practiced at that. In fact, more than 30% of their communication is digital. So you've got to bridge as a leader that communication gap. Now they meaning Gen Z, will enjoy the one-on-one FaceTime, right? But that's what it's going to require. It's going to require you coming alongside the GPS, alongside each employee to figure out, who are you? What makes you tick? How can I fine-tune this relationship, not only to get the best out of you, but for you to be the best version of who you can be? And so I think it also is an important consideration that you have to be deliberately very clear about expectations and about norms and about culture, and don't make the assumption that people get it and or understand. So those are just a couple of areas where you begin. I think the biggest freak out moment for corporate space is now having to have these one-on-one conversations and guide people on their journey in order to make them successful. And bear in mind, the data speaks so powerfully for that, because when you've hired somebody, and if your whole process is good, which you're going to have to adjust a little bit, by the way, if that process is good and you hire someone, you want to not only retain those people, but you want to grow them. And so this is, in effect, what is going to be required in every workplace, big and or small, in order to future-proof your business and get the best out of these people as they come in.
So I wrote down two words as you were talking, and I wrote down the word authenticity and I wrote down the word authority. And I'm curious in your perspective of, generally speaking, up to this point, leadership has been an authority, and in some ways there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Like you grew up in a household with a mom or a dad or with somebody who's your authority, and they help guide you and shape you into hopefully the best version of who you can be. I'm curious the value of authenticity, because if this group, if their radar is so more finely attuned to this BS or to the negative emotions that they feel around strict authority, and tying back into the GPS thinking, how much more valuable is just authenticity? And that might even mean like, hey, I don't know what the answer is, or hey, I want to help you, I don't know how to help you. Can we talk about this? Versus the old model of a bit more authority. Hey, I need you to do ABC. I need you. And well, listen, I just learned this super cool thing. It's called the Amygdala Hijack. Yep. And so I'm doing this training, and they're talking about the Amygdala Hijack, and then they said something. I mean, I've kind of like I've thought about this, but never used these terms. And they're saying, have you ever been in a situation where you leave a meeting with somebody, you leave a one-on-one, you leave a performance review or a conversation, and you're thinking to yourself, I have told them 3 times to do this. Like, what are they missing? And this amygdala hijack, basically, it's a part of our brain that's scanning the environment, looking for good or bad, and when it gets hijacked, it's saying, okay, safety first, and new neurons are not firing, meaning what happens is we actually retreat into our memories and we're not making new synaptic connections. So when you're in this moment, you're not collecting information to make a different decision. You're retreating in. And so I'm like, this is like blowing my mind. And as you're saying that, I'm like, wow, the value of authenticity, because if this generation is even, I dare use the word sensitive, but they are more finely attuned to what might not or might set them off. And just this impact of, if we can prevent the amygdala from being hijacked, then it gives us this opportunity to have conversations that get remembered and not forgotten, Very fascinating. Speaking of hijack, maybe I hijacked my own question.
No, I got it. So, being authentic is huge on so many levels. Think about this. Gen Z have been, for all intents and purposes, CEOs of their own lives from day one. Now, let me explain that. Almost from day one, everything in their world was on demand for them. They could, in theory, eat, drink, Uber, do whatever they wanted, when they wanted, on demand. They also were able to curate. In other words, only bring into their lives and consume what it was that they wanted and liked. So if you didn't fall into that curated stream, you were no longer even on their radar. It's like you didn't exist. So here we have these people growing up as CEOs. You also have a generation, as you so accurately said, that are hyper aware of everything. So the second and the third part of that perfect storm I referred to earlier, the first part was technology. The second part is actually... Sorry, Siri's just decided to get into my conversation. I apologize. Isn't that funny? The second part is world news. The third part is social media. And so what with those three parts, the fourth part, for those who are interested, is parenting or leadership, by the way. So those four parts have grown this new generation. And so because they are so have access to so much information 24/7, they have the ability to look behind the curtain, as it were, and they are the most cause-driven generation we've encountered, primarily because they have access to so much. They also have not only access to the news and information, but they have a platform that they can speak on, so they can voice their opinion. Now, you come into the workplace, they've been CEOs their own life. They see themselves as CEOs. They just don't want to have the same risks associated as being a CEO. So they want to have the CEO. They want to be the CEO without the risk, right? So if you are not authentic in your conversations, in your interaction with them, they see through so much. Now, I'm not claiming that they have all wisdom, but they certainly have a lot. And that authentic approach is critical. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 second an authority is bad. What they all, and we all understand, somebody is the authority. It's just, how are you that authority? I can be the authority and authentic and be obnoxious, right? That chef in the kitchen, and I won't mention his name, who's just obnoxious on the TV show that freaks everybody out. Okay, so you can do that. But there are other ways. You read about someone like Steve Jobs, and apparently he was obnoxious. People now think that is the way to be a leader. I'm suggesting that if he wasn't obnoxious, he would have been an even better leader. But my point is this. I don't think they have an issue with authority at all. I think they recognize that. But what they're looking for is authentic authority. In other words, that you are the authority, but you know how to be authentic without being obnoxious. That is how you win everybody over. That is how you win this generation over. And this, in my opinion, is how you lead them well. Now, is that going to mean that you can't have a rebuke, a conversation where you correct people? No, you just have to think about it in today's context of doing that in a way that is meaningful and managed well. So I don't know if I answered your question fully, but I think I did.
Wow. So, Steve, one of the things that I want us to get to in the fireside chat is, because one of the things you had mentioned was parenting, and in the fireside chat, you've got to, the first time I heard you talk about this, mutual uncommon ground, it light bulb, I don't even know if light bulbs, it was like I walked into a light bulb store, were going off in terms of how incredibly powerful. Because as you will share, there's a small little shift that so many parents are putting in maximum effort, trying and completely, in some way, shooting themselves in the foot to build this relationship with their kids versus approaching it from a mutual uncommon ground. So I had to, that was like, this is for me. I want to hear this again in the fireside chat. But in closing, what is a defining statement, or what is a thought that somebody can take to just put into their pocket to to continuously marinate on, because you have been in the trenches with these individuals, with these young adults, and data aside, you have seen this year after year after year. So allow somebody to who's saying, hey, I'm managing, I'm starting to hire these people, I'm having to work alongside these people. What is one thing that they can start to take away and immediately improve relationship with, or improve the way that they manage and lead this new generation?
It's a big conversation, and let me encourage anybody who agrees with us up until now in the following way. We look at this generation as disconnected, connected on their phones, but disconnected. And that is completely inaccurate. They are just communicating with the world differently. And when we take the dis out of disconnected, what I use dis for is deliberate, influence, stream. And so I want to just close by saying this. The economy and the currency has shifted. Today we live in an economy that is an influence or influencer economy. The currency of the day is influence. And if people can understand that it is your responsibility to influence this generation, your employees, well, you will be surprised, delighted, dare I say, at the incredible value that you will get, the incredible value that you will see. This is not manipulation. This is not living their lives for them or becoming a helicopter parent or this is understanding that influence is the way our world works. There has been a massive shift. And if you forget that others are influencing your employees 24/7, you have made a mistake. So I'm encouraging you to understand that if you look at any new employees from the perspective of how can I influence them well, it's a run-on from the peer group, a peer influence concept. And I don't need to explain influences today because everybody gets it. If you look at your management style as how do I influence them well, how do I influence and lead them well, I think that in conjunction with a new lens through which to view this generation, understanding that they wire differently, you are well on your way. And I want to encourage you just to take one step at a time. The results will speak for themselves. The fruit of your labor will be all you need to encourage you to continue in a certain direction.
Steve, thank you so much for being on the show and in many ways taking something that is, it's so far out in front of how we think, of how we want to even acknowledge, and giving us some tangible ways to address this. I look forward to talking to you more on the Fireside Chat. If you want to get a hold of Steve, we've got his LinkedIn and his website linked up. Go there, check him out. He's releasing new content, stories, ideas, articles, and things that help you stay current in understanding the trends, the ideas, the drivers, the challenges to avoid with this new generation in the workforce.